All right, since we're looking at retrieval cues themselves, and since we're looking at those, I want to focus in on two other key concepts that come along with retrieval cues. The first one is the idea of, which I already mentioned, the context-dependent learning, and that's a good example of what we're talking about here. The other one is something we refer to as serial position cues, and let me explain that one in just a second. The other one, which I already mentioned briefly, and I want to expand a little bit on it. Well, no, I don't want to. I already did that. So let me focus in on serial position effect essentially here, because it is key in understanding retrieval cues and understanding our learning in general in the kinds of things that we tend to do. Now let me explain it in the abstract first, and then I'll do it more in the practical. Essentially, when we go to remember things, usually what happens is it happens a little bit like this. This is time down here, and this is the items themselves up here. And essentially what happens, or I shouldn't say items, I should say percent of words recalled, okay? And essentially, when you first start learning something or first start being exposed to some material that you're trying to remember, our tendency is to remember the first part of something, of a presentation, let's say, and the last part of a presentation. We refer to that as the serial position effect. Serial position effect. Now, the front part that's this right here, the front part is referred to as the primacy effect. In other words, the things that I see first or hear first I am far more prone to remember it then. I'm far more prone to remember it. And then the last part, which is right here, is the latency effect, not latency effect, primacy and recency effect. I'm sorry, I always get those confused. So the recency effect. And essentially, what happens in any presentation is that people, when they first focus in on what you're talking about, that's where this part of the curve occurs. And then they kind of get saturated with a lot of the information that you're presenting down here in this trough, and this is where things are most likely to be forgotten. And so knowing that, then, if you're going to do a presentation of any sort and you want people to remember it, you have to find a way, essentially, to increase this curve so that it is not as shallow or not as deep. And so you've got to find ways to impact this area right here by doing something different, whatever that would be. But the primacy and recency effect, also referred to as the serial position effect, is our tendency to remember things early and at the end. Now, what does this have to do with it? Well, this picture basically shows after the wedding of Kate Middleton and Prince William. And generally, the names that they remembered, probably they remembered the last few people that they saw. And that would be really a good example of this serial position effect. And that goes with the understanding that we have as far as memory is concerned. Now, just to review real quickly on this, is this one and this little cartoon is essentially, it's the idea of state-dependent learning, which I mentioned earlier, And state-dependent learning basically says that if we can recreate learning or memory, we can recreate a situation, my likelihood of remembering it is far greater. So you probably have gone someplace or wanted to do something. I'll give you a good example. I'll just rat myself out here and throw myself under the bus. But a lot of times I have an idea or I think of something that I need to do and I can't remember it. I'll go somewhere and I can't remember it. So I retrace my steps back to where I remembered the particular item and then remember it and then go back to do it again. And that's a good example of state-dependent learning. If you can't remember something and you basically retrace your steps, that in and of itself betrays our understanding that if I can recreate the situation in which I remembered something, I will tend to remember it accordingly. And that's all part of the backdrop to what we're talking about here when we talk about state-dependent learning. The big idea is retrieval, and retrieval cues and what I use to remember and pull things out of memory. Now, we're going to turn our attention here to how forgetting actually occurs and how we reconstruct memory accordingly.